Chapter 6, Classroom Instruction, in our Fire and Emergency Services Instructor class. Glad to have you. Let's get to work. Learning Objective 1. We're going to describe presentation techniques that most effectively communicate information to students. Classroom instruction is a complicated and multifaceted skill. This chapter outlines significant resources and skills required in classroom teaching. For example, classroom instruction requires that an instructor practice public speaking and teaching to become confident in the skill. After building the confidence, instructors can focus on turning public speaking into effective lecturing and engaging students in active learning. The purpose of this chapter is to introduce various aspects of classroom instruction: presentation techniques, the four-step method of instruction, instructional methods, structured exercises, competency-based learning in the fire and emergency services, and teaching strategies. Presentation techniques. Presentation is the art of clearly and concisely explaining information in ways that an anticipated audience can understand. It requires both an understanding of interpersonal communication and the ability to apply that understanding to public speaking. For instructors, public speaking usually occurs in a classroom setting with an audience of students. Presentation techniques can also apply to presentations given to superiors, administrative bodies, collaborative agencies, or the general public. The sections that follow will describe the characteristics of effective speakers, explain how to plan, organize, and sequence a presentation, and describe how to effectively use transitions. The instructor needs to expand on his knowledge and practice each of these methods in order to become more proficient in them. The first step towards becoming an effective public speaker is to identify the characteristics displayed by effective speakers. Characteristics that apply to the instructor in the classroom include audience-centered. The speaker knows the audience and adapts his or her topic, speech organization, presentation style, and personal appearance to this audience. In the classroom, this involves matching the instructor's presentation style to the student's learning styles. Next is good development of ideas. Effective speakers create interesting, appealing, and memorable ways of presenting their information. In a classroom setting, this may include using relevant examples, telling stories to which the audience can relate, or using effective metaphors. And lastly, for this slide, is good organization of ideas. Effective speakers organize their material so that their audience is never lost during the presentation. Persuasive speeches include an intention grabber, necessary background information, an illustration of the problem or situation, and finally, solutions for the situation. An informative speech may be organized either topically or by level of complexity. Continuing on characteristics of effective speakers. Best choice of words. Tailor a presentation's wording to its intended audience. Explain any industry jargon to an introductory level audience. A more experienced audience will appreciate the correct usage of technical terms. Good delivery skills. Effective speakers use the following communication techniques to enhance the words that they have chosen. Keep appropriate eye contact with the audience members. Speak to the entire audience, not just one section or one room of the room, or one side of the room, or one person. Use appropriate gestures to illustrate mental pictures or emphasize key points. Pause periodically so students can think about what they have heard and ask questions. Do not cut a pause short just because no one is responding. Refrain from adding too many personal anecdotes to presentations. A few anecdotes add interest and relevance to a class, but too many can be a distraction. Good vocal characteristics. Major elements of good vocal characteristics are pronunciation, pronouncing each word correctly, stressing the right words or syllables, and pausing where appropriate. Good grammar. Using correct tense, possession, and pronoun agreement. Vocal variety, also known as inflection, refers to the changes in loudness, pitch, and the rate of speech. Speakers use these changes to emphasize important points and to keep the audience's attention. Enunciation, clearly emphasizing each syllable, accent, and pause. Avoid slurring or mumbling when speaking in front of a group. Projection, speaking loudly and clearly enough to be heard in the back of the room or auditorium. Rate of speech, speed at which words are spoken. Effective instructors will speak more slowly when presenting new information or emphasizing important points, or when students need to take notes. As students become more familiar with the material, instructors can speak more quickly. Conversational tone. A relaxed tone makes listeners feel at ease and ready to receive information. Positive attitude. Effective speakers display a positive attitude about the subject matter they are presenting. Appropriate use of humor. Appropriate humor can create a relaxed atmosphere and get the attention of the audience. Always avoid inappropriate humor that may offend members of the audience. And finally, for this slide, personal style. Effective speakers use a personal style, capitalizing on their own unique experiences and abilities. Presentation planning. Instructors can plan for presentations so that they are prepared and at their most effective. The following suggestions should improve any presentation. Practice the delivery of a presentation. Attempt to put it into practice, the characteristics of effective public speakers. Make a video recording of the presentation and review it for distracting actions and speech patterns. Making a recording also enables instructors to experiment with different ways to present materials, which can increase instructional effectiveness. Check the presentation materials to ensure that they are complete, in order, and correct for the topic. Analyze the presentation to ensure that it is logical in its sequence. Get plenty of rest the night before the presentation. Let's relax before a training session. Select comfortable clothing and always dress appropriately. Anticipate potential problems and prepare to resolve them should they occur. Always have a backup plan for unanticipated technology failures, including hard copies of the presentation. Oral presentations generally consist of 3 parts: the opening or introduction, the body, and the summary or conclusion. This format tells the listener or student the topic of the presentation, gives details about the topic, and then restates the main points. All presentations should follow this general format. Descriptions of the three parts are the opening and introduction. Use the opening of the presentation to get the attention of the students. Introduce the students to the topic and purpose of the presentation. And tell them how it relates to them or their jobs. Also, present a summary or outline of the main points to help the students remain focused. The body of the presentation. Present the information in a logical sequence, along with supporting facts and information. Separate the body of a long presentation into smaller, more easily understood segments. Ensure that each segment conveys a single point or idea and has its own opening, body, and summary. Use transition phrases to link the segments. The summary or conclusion. Review the objective of the presentation and how it is relevant to the overall goal of the course. Emphasize the main points and introduce the next lesson or the demonstration that is associated with the presentation. Methods of sequencing. Experts in the field of teaching methodology and speech communication have established ways of effectively sequencing information in a presentation. The sequence depends on the topic and the organization of the lesson plan. Generally accepted sequences for instructional delivery include the known to unknown. This begins with information the students are familiar with or already know before introducing unfamiliar or unknown material. Known to unknown. This method is effective because students base their learning experience on something they already recognize. Simple to complex. We begin teaching the basic knowledge or skill, then introduce more difficult or complex knowledge as the lesson progresses. Basic knowledge and skills are necessary foundations for mastering more complex knowledge and skills. For example, the instructor would teach basic rope skills before teaching rigging and hauling techniques. The next is whole, part, whole. Begin this sequence with an overview of the entire topic or a demonstration of the complete skill in real time. Next, divide the topic or skill into subsections or steps and describe or demonstrate each of them. Close with a summary of the entire topic or a demonstration of the complete skill. And lastly for this slide is step by step. Teach each individual step in the correct order and then have students practice the steps in the same order. A variation of this sequence is called progressive part, in which steps 1 and 2 are learned before progressing to step 3. After mastering 1, 2, and 3, the student learns step 4, and so on. Finally, the student must perform all steps sequentially in a single skill. Instructors commonly use all of these sequences to present new material because they provide a solid foundation for learning. These sequences also help instructors outline the points that are essential to understanding the topic and mastering a skill. Educational research recommends that instructors evaluate students' understanding during the lesson. A short list of evaluation techniques that can be integrated into a lesson plan for this purpose include to gauge student insight by showing physical examples of unfamiliar objects or demonstrate unfamiliar processes, or measure comprehension by diagramming a complex structured set of ideas on a chalkboard or handout, or through other visual aids. Use demonstrations and modeling where possible, particularly cognitive modeling in which the instructor recites steps or processes out loud while students demonstrate a skill. Reinforce aspects that interest students and increase student motivation by initiating discussion on the interest value or application possibilities of the new material. In all lessons, instructors must ensure that they introduce students to the key points, explain why the information is important, emphasize these points in the related parts of the lesson, and review and summarize them at the end of the lesson. Even if instructors present only a lesson segment, they should still ensure that the segment flows logically using one of the sequential methods. And this is the portion that I just read on the previous slide, so we will continue moving on. Pause it if you need to read it. Here we go. Transitions, real quickly, for continuity and consistency. Instructors use transitions to keep students' attention between portions of the lessons. Transitions preview what will happen next or relate an upcoming concept or skill to a previous one. Effective transitions can create interest among students, keep their attention, and help them to make logical connections between portions of the lesson. The lesson plan should indicate necessary transitions for the benefit of both experienced and inexperienced instructors. Effective transitions help instructors. What do? Well, they help maintain interest. We can keep the audience interested in the overall class topic. Helps with the pace the lesson. We can keep the information flowing steadily without interruption. Can maintain consistency. This helps ensure that the topics and lessons throughout a course are taught in a similar manner with recognizable transitions. Can establish relationships. Can show how parts of the topic are related to each other. Can provide previews. Can give the audience an idea of what to expect in the next portion of the material. And finally, for this slide, it can provide summaries. It can conclude the previous idea or topic. Knowing when to use transitions is a question of timing. Transitions can be used effectively when ending one topic and beginning another, ending a complete lesson within a series or course, starting a new lesson within a series or course, moving from one teaching method to another, and finally, providing rest breaks for students and instructors. Hooray for rest breaks! The length of time a transition requires will vary according to its use. Announcing a rest break for the class takes only a few seconds, while summarizing a complex topic may take several minutes. Including transitions in a lesson plan helps establish the time required and prevents the lesson from continuing too long. Verbal transitions provide a summary and/or preview within a single sentence or two. Types or examples of verbal transitions include a summary statement and preview, An example of this is, now that you understand how to operate the components of the SCBA, our next step is to learn how to assemble them into a working system. That is a summary statement and preview. Second is review of the lesson or course agenda. An example of this is, today we saw a demonstration and received some practical training over how to use a Class A foam to extinguish a flammable liquid fire. And finally, change of media. An example here. In order to illustrate what we have been discussing in the slide presentation, we will now view a video clip that shows how rapidly a fire can develop in a controlled environment. That gave us 3 examples of the summary statement and preview, the review of the lesson or course agenda, and the change of media. Verbal transitions. Words or phrases that may be useful as transitions include in addition to, in other words, as well, therefore, in summary, and not only. Use of words finally and in conclusion should be avoided in oral presentations, as they give students permission to stop listening. Do everything in your power to not give your students permission to stop listening, because they absolutely will. Okay, using specific words or phrases, repeating keywords or their synonyms. Repetition emphasizes the importance of the word or phrase. Sequencing the parts to ensure continuity. Use ordinal numbers such as first, second, or third, and or sequencing words like next to establish the relationship between parts of an idea or process. Use rhetorical questions. Rhetorical questions, ones that do not require an answer from the audience, help to establish a relationship between the information that has been provided and the information that follows. Nonverbal transitions help an instructor to emphasize a point within a topic. These transitions may consist of a change of facial expression, a pause, a gesture, or physically moving from one place or position to another. Nonverbal transitions may also be used to move from one teaching method to another. This kind of transition may disturb student concentration because it involves an obvious change. Altering the light level, turning on audio-visual equipment, or assembling a model takes time and cannot be accomplished effectively while the instructor is lecturing. To make these transitions less noticeable, the instructor may have an aide assemble equipment while the instructor lectures, or call for a break when new equipment needs to be set up for the next portion of the lesson. Learning objective 2. Describe the 4-step method of instruction. The 4-step method of instruction, taken as a whole, is widely accepted structure for teaching a lesson. As the name implies, it consists of 4 steps. The first is preparation. The second is presentation. The third is application. And the fourth is evaluation. For instructors to be successful in completing the stated learning objectives, they must have knowledge of lesson plan terminology and definitions and be able to apply the 4-step method of instruction. This section and the sections that follow describe each step in greater detail. Skills associated with giving a prepared classroom or a cognitive lesson are shown in Skill Sheet 6.1 if you'd like to review that. Skill Sheet 6.1. Skills associated with giving a prepared practical psychomotor lesson are shown in Skill Sheet 6-2. I recommend everybody review Skill Sheet 6-1 and Skill Sheet 6-2 located in your books. And here is a picture of our 4-step method of instruction, which we will be doing a deep dive in the following slides: preparation, presentation, application, and evaluation. In the preparation step, instructors introduce the lesson and show how the material is relevant to the student's needs. An instructor can accomplish this by introducing the topic, gaining the student's attention, stating the learning objectives, explaining how the information or skill in the lesson is directly relevant to the student's job, motivating the student to learn the information, stating the lesson's key points so that students are prepared to listen from them or to them. Each of these actions will help to create a foundation from which the instructor can make the presentation. By relating the topic to previously learned information or past student experiences, instructors can show students why the topic is important and how it will benefit them. In the presentation step, the instructor follows an orderly, sequential outline to present the lesson content. Key points on this outline include teaching methods, learning activities, demonstrations and practices, a list of instructional support materials needed for the lesson, such as audiovisuals, worksheets, and handouts. Summary sections given at logical stopping points and at the end of the outline. The summary gives the instructor an opportunity to emphasize critical information throughout the lesson and provide closure at the end. By following the presentation outline, the instructor enhances the student's ability to achieve the desired learning objectives and outcomes. In the application step, the instructor provides opportunities for students to learn through a variety of activities, including exercises, discussions, work groups, skill practices, and practical training evolutions. Most learning takes place during this critically important step. Instructors can combine the application and presentation steps so that as students learn the lesson content, they can participate in activities that require them to think, correctly manipulate tools, or safely demonstrate skills. During an exercise, the application step is often associated with performing the operations or steps of a specific task. However, students may also be asked to give a presentation, lead a group discussion or brainstorming session, apply research methods, or demonstrate outlining and writing techniques. Evaluation. In this fourth and final step, students demonstrate how much they have learned through a written, oral, or practical examination. Written and oral tests are typically used to evaluate cognitive learning, while practical tests are used to evaluate a student's ability to perform a specific skill within safety parameters. The purpose of the evaluation step is to determine whether our students have achieved the lesson objectives. Learning Objective 3, we're going to discuss instructional delivery methods. We as instructors are encouraged to become comfortable with a number of different methods to give us the most flexibility to present and/or adjust the material in the most effective manner. The following sections describe various instructional methods, their benefits, and recommendations for accomplishing them. These instructional methods include giving an illustrated lecture. We can provide a demonstration. We can lead a class discussion. We can ask our students effective questions, or we can instruct a psychomotor skill. Let's talk about giving an illustrated lecture. In illustrated lecture format, instructors explain a topic with the help of audiovisual aids, such as computer-generated slide presentations, such as PowerPoint or Keynote. PowerPoint is the dominant program out there in today's computer world. We can use illustrations on dry erase boards or chalkboards, drawings and photographs, or recorded video. The illustrated lecture format is an effective method to provide facts, rules and regulations, clarifications, examples, and definitions. It allows one speaker to reach an audience of any size, from a single student to a full auditorium. Many students can be taught at the same time while the instructor only prepares one presentation. And another advantage is the students are familiar with this format, so they are aware of what to expect and what is expected of them. Computer-generated slide presentations are the most widely accepted visual aid instructors use to accompany lectures. Although these presentations can be a valuable asset, an instructor must remember they are merely tools to help illustrate key points or generate discussions. PowerPoints can overwhelm and distract if they last too long, contain too many words, or contain too many special effects. Recommendations on giving an illustrated lecture. We need to make sure there's plenty of time for questions in the lesson plan. Asking questions extemporaneously, which is a fancy way of saying spontaneously. We need to use effective listening skills. We need to avoid presenting too much information at once. Providing supplemental information is always a good thing. And breaking lectures into smaller segments is great if you can make it fit in your allotted time. More recommendations is we want to provide a note-taking guide if we can. Having students transition into pairs or small groups is always a good idea. Giving time to write at the end of class. Providing clear preview of information, including only essential relevant information, and reviewing that information frequently. Providing demonstration. This is an incredibly effective way to teach. 75% of us learning, right, is through the eyes. It's a great way to teach manipulative skills, physical principles, safe techniques, mechanical functions, theoretical or scientific concepts. Providing demonstrations using the three-step method. We as instructors safely demonstrate a task while explaining how and why it is performed. Students absorb this information through sight and hearing. We can do the whole part whole is a helpful sequence for demonstrating psychomotor skills, and this consists of 3 steps. Step 1, we're going to perform the skill at normal speed so students can see an overview of the skill. Step 2 is we're going to perform the skill at slower speed, emphasizing each part individually so that students see details of the skill. And then the 3rd step is perform the skill at the normal speed with explanation during the performance. Whole part whole. Advantages of providing demonstration. When students practice the skill, they use psychomotor skills and add the sense of touch to their learning experiences. The following advantages easily outweigh any disadvantages to using demonstrations in both the cognitive and psychomotor domains. First advantage is students can receive immediate feedback through their participation. Instructors can readily observe behavioral changes, and students have a high level of interest when participating. More advantages. Our instructors can easily determine whether our students have achieved the learning objectives because we're watching them do it. Learning skills correctly reduces risk when conducted in a safe environment and under careful supervision, thus giving students the confidence to perform the same skills on the job. And that truly is the ultimate goal. Potential demonstration drawbacks. Potential drawbacks of the demonstration method include the following. We as instructors have to plan for extensive preparation and cleanup times, especially when using such items as power tools, hose, SCBAs, cardiopulmonary resuscitation mannequins. Careful lesson planning is important because assembly and practice can use much of the class time. Large groups of students require extra equipment for practice, as well as additional instructors for supervising, coaching, and enforcing safety regulations. Instructors must closely monitor students who are practicing potentially dangerous skills for the first time. Skills that must be performed or practiced outside depend on the weather. Instructors must have a contingency plan available in the event of inclement weather conditions. Always have Plan B, potentially C and D. Leading class discussions. Lesson plans may include directions for structured discussion sessions in either large or small groups. These directions usually provide discussion topics and can also specify the most optimal arrangements for the groups. As instructors become more experienced, discussions may result spontaneously as a response to student questions. Instructors should remember that discussions are less predictable than lectures in terms of the amount of class time they require. During a discussion, instructors and students can exchange views and ideas. They can ask questions and receive answers. We can provide examples based on experiences. Everyone can arrive at conclusions, and we could form a consensus. Leading class discussions effectiveness. For this method to be effective, students must have a basic knowledge of the subject before the discussion begins. The discussion method is not a good format for introducing new material to inexperienced students. In a whole group discussion, the lesson plan contains the basic information for the discussion. The instructor should determine whether or not a specific topic can generate enough interest for a whole group discussion. A whole group discussion can help students to accomplish the following learning objectives. It can help us accomplish sharing information and knowledge, applying theories and critical thinking skills, expressing personal views and ideas, collaborating and working as a team, and clarifying attitudes, values, and beliefs. An instructor should establish the time required for the discussion and ensure that it is available for the class period. The instructor should also develop an opener for the discussion, which may consist of a short narrative, case study, hypothetical situation, or a problem. These openers and topics may be provided in prepared or adjusted lesson plans. Because discussions can be time-consuming, the instructor must ensure that the time is used efficiently and the topic is specific enough to help students stay focused. Whole group discussions have two types, guided and conference. The first is guided. This is where the instructor presents a topic to the group, and the members of the group discuss ideas in an orderly exchange, controlled or guided by the instructor. The intent of this type of discussion is for students to gain knowledge from other group members, modify their own ideas, or develop new ones. As facilitator, the instructor's role is to guide the discussion and meet the lesson objectives in the following ways. Keep the discussion on the topic and on schedule. We want to add pertinent details. We want to ask thought-provoking questions. The second style in whole group discussions is conference. A conference discussion is less controlled than a guided discussion. In this method, instructors are facilitators, not teachers. They do not tell the group how or what to think. The intent is for the students to understand how they view a topic rather than being influenced by their instructor. The instructor's responsibilities in this format include, first, providing the background information on the topic, then stating or restating problems, asking questions, or clarifying students' comments. Other than this, the instructor should allow the students to control the discussion and should not actively participate. Controlling or eliminating bickering and irrelevant discussion, reconciling differences of opinion, and uniting students. Here's a note. The term conference is used for both a discussion format and a type of meeting that has the same purpose, only on a larger scale. Continuing with whole group discussions. Ahead of a class session, we as instructors should develop the means of closing that discussion. May include a summary of the problem and list of solutions developed. The students may write their own summaries to rephrase and restate major points generated in the discussion. Small group discussions. Instructors do not actively participate in small group discussions. Instead, they select a student to facilitate or lead the discussion in each group. The main advantage of this format is that students express their ideas and opinions more openly with their peers than they do when an instructor is present. Our small group discussions are most effective when the task is structured, the students are experienced in working with others, The learning outcome is clearly defined, and the students have time to prepare for the discussion. Small group discussions. What is the instructor's role? The instructor's role in this format is to define group goals, establish a time frame for discussion, and monitor the groups to make sure students stay on task. When the discussion is finished, instructors may want to have students write summaries of their discussions or present their findings to the rest of the class. Prepared lesson plans will generally indicate when small group discussions are desirable in the lesson plan, how much time should be provided for the discussions, and what prompts or topics should be provided to the small groups. Leading discussions. Instructor's role continued. Both large and small group discussions require that instructors demonstrate leadership to ensure that students achieve course goals. Instructors should monitor how involved students are in the discussion, who is and is not participating, and whether the discussion stays on topic. The instructor should assume or delegate the following roles. The first is director. This person's job is to keep the discussion moving forward. Make sure the students stay focused on the topic. The next role is called gatekeeper. This role ensures that all students have an opportunity to speak, that no one dominates the discussion, and that any cultural differences are considered. And the last role is the timekeeper. This person reminds the students of the time remaining for discussion or summary. To ensure that the students understand the intention of the discussion, the instructor should perform the following tasks. First, we need to open the discussion by stating the topic or problem to be solved. Then, paraphrase students' contributions to ensure that they understand the material. Let's ask questions to make sure that students understand their own positions, as well as those of their classmates. Act as a resource for additional information and statistics for our students. And then we're going to summarize the results of the discussion. Another note, instructors who regularly plan small group discussions should coach students in the leadership skills they will need to serve as group facilitators. Discussion techniques. A variety of techniques may be used to direct the outcome of a discussion. These techniques apply to both large and small group discussions and include brainstorming. This is when students try to generate as many ideas as they possibly can, operating under the principle that there are no bad ideas. The group then evaluates the ideas and decides which ones have the most merit. Brainstorming requires students to use creative thinking to propose a solution to a problem based on their knowledge and experience. The next technique is nominal group process. In this format, the discussion closely imitates an organizational decision-making process that students will encounter in their jobs. This technique is more structured than brainstorming and requires that ideas be more realistic. The steps are, number one, begin the session by having students write a list of pros and cons of the topic. Step two, have students present their list to the group, each speaking in order until all have commented. Step 3 is to correlate, examine, discuss, and rewrite comments presented. Step 4 is have the group select the top 5 considerations. And step 5 will be the instructor summarizing the findings. And the last technique is agenda-based process. This is where the instructor provides the students with an agenda of topics or key points. The students then do research and prepare reports to give to the group. In the discussion, students may ask questions or express opinions on the reports. Asking effective questions to achieve objectives. Instructors use questions for a variety of reasons, including to receive feedback on how instruction is progressing and to promote critical thinking. Questions may also be used to achieve the following objectives. We're looking to promote discussion, encourage interest and curiosity. We want to motivate students to acquire knowledge on their own and to assess students' level of understanding. Can also control the behavior of disruptive or non-participating students. And this slide here, I discussed on the previous slide, so I'll leave it up here. But these are also reasons why we ask effective questions. Guidelines to asking effective questions. Students' responses to questions can also help instructors recognize the need to alter a lesson plan or adjust our teaching style. For example, instructors may realize that they need to incorporate techniques more appropriate to their students' learning styles. Some curriculum developers include prepared questions in their lesson plans, but instructors should know how to create effective questions of their own. This skill also enables the instructor to evaluate prepared questions so that the questions can be adjusted or improved if needed. Following these guidelines for developing and asking effective questions. 1. We can plan and or review questions in advance. We can write and arrange questions in a logical order. We can phrase questions clearly. And let's try to only ask one question at a time. Let's be sure that the wording of the question doesn't make the answer obvious. Our students will recognize the intended answer and think that the question is, at best, hypothetical and at worst, a waste of time. Allow a wait time. When questions are directed to the entire class, wait until there is a response. It may take time before a student raises his or her hand to answer. An appropriate wait time is normally around 3 to 5 seconds. After waiting, call on a student directly. Following the wait time, address a student directly by name. Give the student time to respond and do not hurry, especially when the student is shy. A lot of times in a very large class, I will make a hat that has everybody's name in it, and I'll pull names so that people don't think I'm picking on anyone. So if you don't want to ask, nobody wants to volunteer, then we'll go to the lottery and I pull a name. Let's never use questions to intimidate, embarrass, or humiliate students. Intentionally intimidating, embarrassing, or humiliating a student is inappropriate and always unprofessional. Guidelines to asking effective questions continued. Let's distribute questions evenly. Make sure to call on as many students as possible. Ask questions at a variety of levels and of a variety of types. Instructors should use all types of questions that are appropriate to the topic and the student's learning styles. Let's adapt questions to students' ability level. Let's match the questions to individual student abilities. This ensures that most students will be able to answer at least some of the questions. Let's ask appropriately challenging questions. Questions should never be so easy that no thought is required to answer them. But let's really try to also make them attainable. Avoid asking questions too soon. For questions to be effective, students must have the knowledge to answer them. Questions that are intended to determine a student's current level of knowledge or opinion can be asked early in the session. Follow up on the student's answers. We as instructors can elicit further response by using techniques such as inviting elaboration, encouraging other class members to respond, or remaining silent. Here's an example. Once a student has answered the question, we as the instructor may ask, "Could you expand on your answer?" This is a way of encouraging the student to go into greater detail. The instructor may also want to involve other students by asking them to add an idea, fact, or experience to the first answer. While instructors may be uncomfortable with silence during a class, being deliberately silent can be an effective tool when asking questions. The instructor's silence can motivate a student to elaborate on the initial answer. New instructors should practice developing questions and including them in their lesson plans or outlines. When there is extra time in a session, the questions can be used to help students focus on the presentation's key points. When time allows, questions can also be used to start group discussions. Different types of questions produce different types of answers. When considering which kind of question to ask, we as instructors need to consider what they want to accomplish with that particular point in the lesson. Instructors can use the following types of questions to start discussions, stimulate thinking, provide feedback on how training is being received, and enable students to both assess their own learning and manage any gaps. Using question types, once again, reiterating, we can use them to start discussions, stimulate thinking, provide feedback, and enable our students to assess and manage their own learning. Now, our question types. Our first one is rhetorical. A rhetorical question is used to stimulate thinking. They do not necessarily have one correct answer and often do not call for a spoken response. For example, an instructor might open a safety lesson by saying, "What are the most important pieces of equipment you will use on an emergency scene to protect yourself from injury or exposure?" By the end of this lesson, you will know how to answer this question. Next question type is closed. This type of question has a limited number of possible answers. The instructor is able to anticipate and judge the accuracy of a student's response. An example of closed is, what is the definition of a flashover? The next question type is open. This type of question has many acceptable answers. The instructor has general criteria for judging the accuracy of an answer, although student answers may be unexpected. An example of this is, what information can you gain during a structure fire size-up? The next question type is direct. The instructor directs a question to a student who must then respond. This type of question is not frequently used with adult learners because it can make students uncomfortable. However, asking direct questions can be an effective way to encourage bored or disengaged students to participate. Next question type is overhead. The instructor asks a question of the entire class, not just one student. Any member of the class is free to respond, either by calling out the answer or by raising a hand and waiting to be recognized. This technique is helpful in starting discussions or offering ideas or opinions. If no one answers, the instructor can then direct the question to an individual student. Instructors may also allow students to consult with each other in groups to produce the answer. The next question type is relay. Instead of answering a student's question, the instructor asks the rest of the class to answer the question. Relay questions are a good way to open a discussion or stimulate interest, but instructors should avoid this technique if they do not know the answer. In these circumstances, it's better to say, "I don't know," and maybe we as a class can learn the answer together. And the last is redirected. This type of question is useful when a student asks for an answer that the instructor believes he or she should already know. The instructor can ask the student to provide small amounts of information that, taken together, will answer the original question. Responding to student answers. When instructors ask questions, they should prepare for a variety of student responses. Instructors should learn appropriate ways to respond when students provide an answer or pose a new question as their reply. Some basic guidelines for instructors are as follows. Let's use positive reinforcement. If a student answers a question correctly, the instructor might say, "That is absolutely right," or "You seem to have a good understanding of this topic." When a student answers only partially correct, positively reinforce the correct portion, then redirect the question back to the student or ask another student to complete the answer. Always provide correct answers if the students do not. Providing correct answers benefits the entire class. Wrong answers are to be expected as part of the learning process. An appropriate response could be, "That is close. Maybe I didn't ask the question clearly. What I am asking is," and then ask the question again, hoping for the correct answer. And you can see here on this slide, we as instructors are sometimes reluctant to discourage responses so that they accept all answers while tactfully trying to direct the group toward the right conclusion. Taking a wrong answer and asking why it is wrong or where it may fit appropriately in the lesson provides students with the opportunity to think and analyze the problem or problems, compare facts and ideas and apply them to different situations, critique their responses and find correct solutions, and explore and discover new methods of application. Answering students' questions is one of the most difficult things for us as instructors to do. Some students may pose questions that appear to be logical, but are actually complex, illogical, or off topic. An instructor can respond to these questions in the following ways. We can be aware that some questions can be controversial or distract the class. We as instructors should only provide answers to questions when they have the knowledge, experience, or resource to do so. If this is not the case, we should defer the question in order to research the answer or to consult a more knowledgeable source. such as a senior instructor or an administrator. We can redirect it. Redirect the question to another student who is likely to respond correctly. This approach can also generate some good group discussion. Deferring questions that are beyond the scope of the lesson or telling the students that they will learn the answer later in the course is a lot of times appropriate. Always answer truthfully. Never bluff students by providing false or misleading information. Doing so can destroy the instructor's credibility. Psychomotor skill instruction. Much of what is done in the emergency services directly relates to performing an action. An action often involves complex thought and deliberate response to observations made in the field. It may also need to be altered or adjusted to fit the exact circumstance. The development of psychomotor skills typically occurs in 3 phases. In the cognitive phase, the student is a beginner and is developing the basic procedure of the skill through verbal and visual stimulus. Students use trial and error to strengthen their understanding of the skill, a process that requires a great deal of effort. In this phase, the instructor has a great deal of influence and must demonstrate as much patience as possible to encourage the student and stay positive. A step-by-step skill sheet is helpful and will keep the student on track to fully meet the lesson objectives. In the associative phase, students grow more comfortable performing the skill. They associate cognitive knowledge with the muscular movement needed to master the skill. In this phase, students realize and overcome initial errors, and they develop and strengthen connections between the steps of the skill. Fluidity increases, but the student still needs to think about the steps to be completed. In this phase, the instructor is more of an evaluator and a coach than a teacher. In the autonomous phase, the student's actions become smoother and the performance of the actions become quicker. Students have moved toward the point where they no longer need to think about the action. The instructor has now become the coach and is there to help students refine their efforts. This phase is associated with an effortless approach to the task and the ability to adapt the task to varying environments. Psychomotor skill instruction, you can see throughout the 3 phases, the instructor not should, shall, must always consider the student's emotional safety, mental safety, and physical safety. We as instructors must use a systematic and structured approach to psychomotor skill instruction. A sequential approach includes preparation. Here, we as instructors are ready to teach the skill and are familiar with the skill level of the student. Next is conceptualization. The student is given the cognitive elements of the skill. This is where the student learns what to do in a larger context that includes possible problems, common errors, and potential risks. Visualization. The instructor demonstrates the skill in its entirety, providing a model for student performance. Verbalization. The instructor verbalizes the skill to the student, breaking down the tasks into subtasks in the correct order. The student should be able to verbalize the steps and assist in placing the steps in the correct order. Preparation, conceptualization, visualization, verbalization. Psychomotor skill instruction, practice. Deliberate and conscious effort to refine the skill performance and accomplish the skill safely is critical for ultimate success and eventual mastery. Feedback. Instructors use feedback to convey whether students are meeting the instructor's expectations and to correct errors or observed problems. Students use feedback to indicate where they feel successful in achieving an objective. Mastery. Both instructors and students will strive to demonstrate their ability to perform the skill routinely without error. Instructors may indicate to students which skills cannot be mastered over a single class session, but should be strived for over the course of a career. Autonomy. Ultimately, the instructor wants students to be able to adapt the skill in practical situations without error. Learning Objective 4. Describe the use of structured exercises. Structured exercises include a variety of instructional methods that actively involve students in the learning process. Prepared or adjusted lesson plans may include structured exercises for instructors to lead. The following sections provide brief descriptions of structured exercises that instructors may encounter: case studies, role-playing, simulations, field and laboratory experiences. A case study, sometimes referred to as a scenario, is a description of a real or hypothetical problem that an organization or an individual has dealt with and may face in the future. Typically, a case study reviews and discusses detailed accounts of past events. Students then analyze the situation and synthesize possible answers to the problem. The purpose of studying past incidents is to be prepared for similar circumstances in the future. Case studies provide students with the opportunity to discuss ideas and solve problems. These discussions develop their ability to examine facts and analyze situations in order to reach a conclusion or determine a course of action. The instructor provides students with time to review, research, and discuss the situation. Face-to-face or electronic communication between students must be established to encourage student reaction. Students must be willing and able to communicate and defend their suggestions to the group. In role-playing, students act out the role of a character in a scenario to prepare for situations they may encounter while fulfilling their duties. Role-playing can be used when training personnel for a variety of tasks or situations, such as public information officers who interact with members of the community or public safety telecommunication personnel who must receive and dispatch calls during emotionally intense incidents. At the end of the role play, the instructor debriefs participants and observes about the objective of the activity. This debriefing also gives students an opportunity to explain their feelings and actions during the role-playing activity. Some role-playing scenarios may be emotionally charged, and the instructor should allow time in the debriefing for students to successfully separate themselves from the role they have played. The instructor should also summarize the scenario and reinforce the importance of any positive behavior that was exhibited. Role-playing advantages. Role-playing is a structured activity that has many advantages. It encourages application of knowledge and safe practice of skills. It permits students to practice under conditions that simulate an incident without the danger of fatal consequences. It improves understanding of critical features of interpersonal relations. It allows students to identify multiple approaches to a problem. It also increases development of empathy as students discuss their own perspectives and listen to their classmates' opinions. It helps develop critical awareness. It prepares students for emotionally challenging events such as dealing with trauma patients. Role-playing disadvantages. We as instructors should always be aware that role-playing has the following disadvantages. Preparation can be complicated and time-consuming. Let's consider using case studies as the basis for role-playing scenarios, which reduces the preparation time for both. Role-playing can take time to perform and may result in students digressing from the topic when they're bored, uninterested, or see no value in the activity. Instructors can combat this attitude by explaining the importance and relevance of all activities and how they relate to the students' work-related duties. Role-playing requires students to identify, at least superficially, with the characters and scenarios. Some students will be more comfortable in that process than others. Remind students that role-playing is the closest simulation possible in a controlled setting to some types of stressful encounters, and that they should not take anything personally when they are in character for the activity. Here's a note. When we're debriefing a role-playing scenario, we as instructors need to remind our students that actions taken during the scenario should not be considered part of a fellow student's personal character, but rather part of a larger training situation designed to ingrain situational behavior and skills. Simulations. Training simulations also allow students to participate in scenarios that represent situations they are likely to encounter on the job. These simulations may take many forms, from practical training evolutions using demonstration devices to technology-centered activities such as computer-based training. Simulations permit students to experience a situation, make decisions, and see the results of their decisions without a negative consequence that can occur at an actual emergency. The key to all simulations is to ensure that they effectively reflect the equipment, procedures, protocols, and situations that the students will encounter on duty. Simulations may be tailored to the type and scope of the training. For example, a tabletop emergency management drill is an economical and effective simulation. Confined space rescue training that permits actual operations in a simulated hazardous environment is an example of a practical training evolution. Computer-based training permits individual students, that is, to operate apparatus pump panels, simulate command of structure fires, and even attack a computer-created structure fire. Most simulations include role-playing elements, such as students taking on assigned duties and interacting with one another. Field and laboratory experiences provide students with demonstrations and simulations. These experiences allow students to inspect, use, test, and evaluate equipment or processes, either in actual installations or in laboratory settings. Prior to learning in a laboratory or field environment, students should learn safe and applicable procedures to ensure a safe learning environment. In the field, students are typically given a tour of an installation. They may be permitted to observe a fire detection and suppression systems test or see the steps required to replace a component. Field experiences tend to be less controlled than laboratory settings, so students may not be able to handle components. On the other hand, They will be able to see systems functioning on larger scale than is often possible in a laboratory. In a laboratory, students can see models of equipment, such as cutaways of apparatus engines, pumps, or sprinkler control valves. They may perform chemistry experiments to simulate fire behavior or fire spread in an enclosed space. In the controlled environment of a laboratory, the instructor explains the equipment or process, demonstrates the steps required, and observes students as they repeat the skills. Students may work independently or in groups. Instructors may also choose to give students a challenge, such as providing them with a defective SCBA regulator and asking them to repair it. Learning Objective 5. We're going to describe competency-based learning in the fire and emergency services. In the fire and emergency services, students should be competent with one set of requisite information and skills before they progress to a new one. Competency-based learning, sometimes referred to as mastery learning, requires that each student successfully master the learning objectives or outcomes of the lesson or course. In this approach, instructors are provided with the specific criteria or standard that students must meet during testing for competency. This information is stated in the learning objectives. Competency-based learning focuses on competency. Primary focus is on the successful and accurate completion of skills, also known as performance-based. Meets individual needs. The training is individualized or adjusted to meet the learner characteristics of the student. It can provide immediate specific feedback. The instructors provide feedback to the individual student when the student performs the skill. It employs modules and multimedia. Courses and lessons are divided into similar blocks that are supported by a variety of audiovisual training aids. Depends on instructors. Instructors must help students learn the skill and become proficient at it. Meets specific objectives. The ultimate goal of every course is for students to master a set of skills that meet specific learning objectives. And finally, uses criterion reference testing. Success is based solely on a pre-designated level of competency, usually 70 to 100%. The competency approach uses criterion reference teaching, learning, and assessments and focuses attention on learning objectives. Students who have problems meeting the desired criteria on their initial efforts get additional instruction, time, and opportunities to perform to the acceptable level. The learning objectives are written to establish the criteria for competency as follows. First, it needs to identify and clearly describe the learning outcome, most commonly called the behavior. An example of this is the student will don an SCBA. Then, it needs to define the important conditions under which the student will perform. These are called the conditions. An example of the conditions are the student will don an SCBA while wearing full personal protective equipment. Third, define the criterion of acceptable performance. This is also called the degree. An example of the degree. The student will don an SCBA while wearing full protective equipment within 45 seconds. When the material is difficult or complex, instructors may need to schedule additional instruction time so that students can assimilate complex concepts. No student should proceed to new material until she or he has become competent in the basic requisite material. The competency approach has advantages and disadvantages, although with proper planning, instructors can overcome the disadvantages. Some advantages of the competency approach to teaching include the students are prepared to advance to more complex knowledge or skills. The students' prior knowledge is used as a building block for new skills, which can make gaining competency easier for the student. The students are made aware of the learning objectives from the beginning so that criteria for passing the course are never in question. And time is given to tailor learning to the student's individual learner characteristics and learning style, which assists the student in gaining the competency. Disadvantages, real quickly, on the competency-based learning. We as instructors have to plan for extra time to ensure all students become competent on the subject. And more effort is required on the instructor's part to determine the student's learning pace and to match it. More disadvantages. Faster students often feel that slower classmates are holding them back, and a wide variety of training materials must be available to meet the learning needs of all students. Learning Objective 6, we're going to identify teaching strategies that encourage active learning. Teaching strategies. As instructors learn more about educating people, they often come to the realization that people learn differently depending on the topic. With these variations in mind, instructors can use different teaching strategies to adapt to changing learning environment and challenges. Instructor-led training is the most prevalent approach to teaching in the fire and emergency services. ILT has the advantages of being flexible, economical, and familiar to both students and instructors. 3 features of instructor-led training are detailed in the following sections: multiple instructors, generating and maintaining student interest, and reinforcing learning. Instructor-led learning environments traditionally have only one instructor serving in multiple roles. A variation on that training style is to split some of the responsibilities among multiple instructors. In addition to sharing the workload, multiple instructors combine their knowledge and experience so that students are better able to meet the course learning objectives or outcomes. This strategy can be an effective educational technique and a unifying force between organizations. In one variation known as team teaching, multiple instructors teach the same topics at the same time with different groups of students. Team teaching provides a more effective use of class time and has a small student to instructor ratio. The instructor with the most knowledge or experience in a particular topic will usually teach the cognitive and demonstration portion of the lesson to all classes. That instructor then joins with other instructors in supervising the practical training evolution. This provides an effective use of resources for multiple areas and specialties. It allows an instructional delivery method that works when the topic is broad. It provides students with an exposure to a wide variety of teaching methods and skills training. Keeps the attention of the group by utilizing each instructor's different voice, pace, and personality. Considerations when using multiple instructors. We need to make an extensive course plan that outlines each instructor's role and their time commitment. We need to maintain communication between all instructors to ensure course continuity and consistency. That is huge. We need to choose instructors whose teaching styles contrast yet balance one another. With multiple instructors, we need to decide in advance who's going to teach which topic. We need to review all lesson outlines together so that each instructor knows what the others are doing. Let's agree on and use the same format for all instructional technology tools. And we're going to designate one of us the lead instructor per topic. We need to determine time commitments and require each instructor to adhere to them. Let's agree that all instructors will be present for the entire course, not just when it is their turn to teach. And meet with other instructors to review the session results. Instructor-led training relies on students' interest for the overall class session to be successful. Interested students are open and responsive and want to concentrate on what they are learning. They're also more willing to actively participate in the learning process. Generating interest is only the first step. To help maintain interest, instructors need to show students how they have a personal connection with the lesson. Generating and maintaining student interest. Here's some strategies. Let's relate learning to student interests. Let's provide material relevant to student experiences. This illustrates the overall usefulness of the information presented. We can offer material that pertains to the student's professional goals, duties, and tasks. Our students are more likely to be curious about information that has a particular importance to their professional futures. We can use humor appropriately. Let's use humor spontaneously and courteously, always courteously. Let's stimulate emotions. The experiences that students bring to training sessions evoke a range of emotions. We as instructors call on these experiences to promote student interest. We can explain and illustrate with examples, stories, analogies, and metaphors. Provide examples that make abstract concepts more relatable to our students. We can use questions to stimulate interest. With practice and experience, instructors can learn to ask appropriate, well-timed, thought-provoking questions that encourage participation and promote understanding. The instructor should be careful not to force a specific viewpoint on the class. And we can use unpredictability and uncertainty. Anticipating the unexpected is exciting, and students who do not know what will happen next are more likely to pay close attention. As long as students feel safe and know that no one will be hurt, this technique can be an effective way to keep students interested. Instructors reinforce learning through repetition and behavioral reinforcement. Repetition involves repeating, re-emphasizing, and reviewing key points with students. Behavioral reinforcement encourages students' attempts to learn by acknowledging their successes and correcting their mistakes. Intentional repetition is an important part of organizing a presentation. For example, in a lecture, elements are introduced, explained, and then summarized. In a skills demonstration, the entire skill is demonstrated and then repeated in smaller segments. Through emphasis and repetition, instructors help students to recognize the importance of key points. Instructors should provide opportunities for students to apply knowledge and practice important skills in a safe learning environment. Behavioral reinforcement is based on psychological theory that connects a change in behavior with the consequences of that change. Behavioral reinforcement establishes rewards through positive reinforcement for students' successes or good behavior, and negative consequences for their failures or bad behavior. In the fire and emergency services, rewards for success include promotion, commendation, general praise. In the learning environment, positive reinforcement may be as simple as an instructor's compliment or encouragement after a student properly performs a skill or masters a theoretical concept. Educational research has demonstrated that students learn faster and make permanent behavioral changes when their successes are met with meaningful positive reinforcement. In contrast to instructor-led training, blended or hybrid learning combines traditional face-to-face and online teaching methods. Ideally, the instructor or course designer has critically evaluated which parts of the course would be better suited face-to-face and which would be enhanced by independent online learning. Instructors who use hybrid learning environment need to be very organized and disciplined in order to maintain a high level of student satisfaction and performance. With the reduction of a formal structure, it is easy for both the instructor and the student to become frustrated and or confused about what is happening and what needs to happen in the course. In the traditional academic type learning environment, students spend most of their time watching and listening to the instructor. In the student-centered learning environment, the instructor shifts the focus to the students. The instructor provides students with active learning activities, such as answering questions, problem solving, and formulating questions of their own. In student-centered learning, the instructor becomes more of a facilitator than a traditional teacher. This method of instruction, more than the traditional method, leads to an increased depth of knowledge and understanding of the material. In the traditional classroom model, the instructor lectures over new material in class, and the student is assigned exercises, activities to complete at home. If students have questions or difficulties with the homework, they have to wait until the next class period to ask for help. The flipped classroom reverses that traditional teaching model. Instead of students coming to class for a lecture, they read and study the new material at home. When they come to class, students have more time to ask questions, discuss the material, and engage in activities that reinforce their learning. By bringing active learning activities into the classroom, the instructor can reduce student frustration and provide a more positive learning environment. Computer simulation. As mentioned, many training programs use instructional technology tools such as computer-based modules and programs that allow students to work at their own pace. CBT may also be used in a more structured format to provide distance learning. Computer-based training programs minimize interactions between student and instructor. We as instructors may present an illustrated lecture remotely over the internet or closed-circuit television, or may only be involved in answering questions that arise as students read information on their own and complete assignments. The authority having jurisdiction needs to inform the instructor of products, instructional technology tools he or she will be using to deliver the instruction. CBT platforms require software to function effectively, and each may have unique requirements. Instructors must make sure that students' computers have necessary internet access, sufficient speed, and enough internal memory. Instructors must make sure that students' computers have necessary internet browsers, computer operating systems, for example, Windows or Macintosh, word processing programs, document readers such as Adobe Acrobat. Unique software is needed for the course. When facilitating computer-based training, instructors sometimes take on the role of computer support specialist. Instructors may be able to answer some questions. However, if they cannot promptly resolve a student's technical problems, instructors should contact someone else who can do so. No student should be penalized because a piece of equipment, software application, or computer does not work properly. Caution! After an email or electronic file has been deleted, traces still remain on the user's computer system. Computer simulation. Instructors need to familiarize themselves with all software used in a computer-based training system. Many of these tools are useful for any distance learning scenario, and instructors may wish to augment a distance learning program by using these tools. Wikis, blogs, and file sharing services, social networking systems, live streaming audio and video, chat sessions, teleconferencing and web conferencing, course management systems, learning management systems. Instructors using CBT should be aware of the ways that this format may interfere with their ability to effectively deliver a message. Feedback from students is minimal, and the technology presents an additional barrier between the instructor and the students. Adjustments in computer simulation. Take a thorough roll call prior to the session. Wait longer for students to answer questions when we're in that virtual space. And limit movement, because it is hard when folks leave the screen. Connect locations via interactive televisions, which really we think Zoom is my closest example there. Give clear instructions for media transitions. Allow time to deal with technical issues that may occur during the lesson. Self-directed learning. In self-directed learning or independent learning, individual students work at their own pace to accomplish course objectives, including the completion of tasks and skills in a predetermined format and the completion of work within a defined time frame. The students are solely responsible for achieving these objectives, which may be determined by the instructor or chosen by the student. An instructor is not involved in the delivery of the training, although one may act as a facilitator and monitor to ensure that students complete the work correctly. As a result, the effectiveness of the distance learning method is heavily dependent on the student's level of motivation. In self-directed learning, the instructor and the student schedule several meetings to monitor the progress of the independent study. Instructors are available to answer questions, evaluate learning achievements, and guide the student, but the learning process is completely the student's responsibility. Self-directed learning often motivates students to discover information and resources beyond lesson requirements. Not all types of training programs, particularly basic level skill programs, are suited to this type of instruction. Individualized instruction. Another variation on instructor-led training is individualized instruction. This has instructors adapt and/or adjust their teaching methods to address the needs of each student in the class and focus on his or her specific learner characteristics and learning styles. The instructor manages learning resources, guides students, and interacts with them, but is not the sole or primary resource for learning as in the traditional instructor-led classroom. For example, students work with other students to meet certain requirements and share experiences. They also work with an instructor or mentor who ensures that they meet the lesson objectives or individual goals. Individualized instruction may also utilize some features of self-directed learning plan and computer-based training. This approach may enable students who would not succeed in a typical learning environment to successfully achieve learning objectives. Individualized instruction basis. A student's needs and learner in characteristics, learning objectives or competencies required by the occupations, instructional strategies and medias that meet the need of the student. During the individualized instruction, the instructor meets frequently with the student to, as we discussed, evaluate progress, prescribe new learning objectives or different learning methods, and provide encouragement. Lots of organizations use individualized instruction techniques in their training programs, including learning activity packets, tutorial instructions, and program learning. I am so proud of everybody for making it. Chapter 6 is a big one. So, end of lecture. Appreciate all your hard work. There you see the information. Get a hold of me if you need me. I'll see you for Chapter 7. Take care. Bye-bye.